So what am I doing? 5 minutes.
Just go getter.
I am yeah,
Start early, finish early.
do it.
I say that I love it. That's Tyler's go-to. Is whenever a meeting ends early, it's like, well, we picked up 13 minutes early, so everyone gets to go home 15 minutes early, right? Yeah. It's pretty good little closing line to
Spoken like a true millennial.
end the meeting. I know, right? I was like, no, it means I get to like catch up on something.
That's right. Hello. Yeah, we got 2020 training. That's another training class all day today.
Oh, okay.
We're definitely putting this training room to task. Oh, look at that. We ran out of seats. This is beautiful. It's the-
I know, I may have to give mine up.
yeah, sit in front. You did it once before. No, you didn't. You didn't sit in front before, have you?
No. Usually not up front.
Yeah. I won't spray it. I'll just say it. When what they say it, don't spray it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. If we do 20 people in here for that policy workshop, we're gonna be short on chairs.
We are. Do you remember that the day when we brought the tables in here from?
So we're gonna have to do that.
You can get 3 or 4 people on each one of those.
Get here earlier.
We should get stadiums like or bleachers. Yeah. See.
I was gonna say, yeah, we can share these.
You can stand up here. Spot.
If you want to move over, I can move to sit next to you up there.
No, we'll put him in the camera.
Yeah, put you on camera. That's what you get for being late.
Yeah.
Or
You don't want to see my bloodshot eyes. So I'll say the right stuff today. Looks legit.
So ISC and ISSA, they have another study group, 35 people sign up. Now it's only 7 attendees.
Yeah, that's pretty common. Start out
I
with
think
this.
we're pretty good here.
Yeah, start out with a huge number and then it dwindles down. Find out the ones that are in it to win it.
And they got to pay too, so
Oh, they have to pay?
yeah, $100. Actually, it's like for the meal, the cost of the meal.
Oh, that's not bad. Just cover it.
I
Oh,
wasn't yesterday.
we should order food. We just had food.
We'll just have to. I'm pretty full.
Too. How's everybody doing today? It's Tuesday. Exhausted?
I just did 7 hours when I TSS.
With who?
Stephanie.
Oh,
Lost.
an FRSecure one?
Uh-huh.
A FISA?
Uh-huh.
Nice.
Nice. No, it was super fun, but I was like.
It was only day one, right?
Stefan,
It's only day one.
You see the smile on my face. No, I'm not stepping on that.
Stefan's good.
No, he's super.
Day 2 is much easier.
What?
Day 2 is much easier,
Yeah.
relatively speaking.
You did admin controls today?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you get to physical at all?
No.
So he's
Alan's just sitting there.
So he's dragging his feet.
So physical's tomorrow on the
Yeah.
Thursday at the final.
See, he's taking his sweet time.
Sweet time.
Yeah.
Spread that out.
He's doing it more thorough than you tell him, you don't have to do this.
That's what I kept saying. I'm like, do you really? get it done?
Seriously?
Really?
Like, haven't we talked enough about segregation of duties already?
No, it was fun.
We did today. So Jeremy, the guy in the back.
Alan.
Why did I say Jeremy?
You scared me. I thought I had his name wrong.
Alan, who used to be formerly known as Jeremy. It's been with me all day today. We had 2020 partner training today. And so we had, we started at 8 o'clock this morning. We had a happy hour at 5 o'clock. And then we're back at it. Yeah. So he had the admin controls training today. And man, it was,
More intense day.
There's 2 people that will be snoring in the back of the class.
yeah, it was funny because you could see people's They were fighting it hard. It's kind of funny. It's awesome,
It's fun.
right? Because I'm pretty passionate about the admin controls piece. I mean, I love admin controls, but man, it's not everybody does. I dig that. That's cool.
You didn't sit through. No, it's just letting that. Right?
Yeah,
You got out of that
I
one.
skipped out of that one.
I'll have to make sure that you're included next time.
Yeah, make sure we
Oh, I
invite,
missed that.
make sure we invite him. All right, let's scoot over. I think it's time. I'm recording. Am I on video too?
Yep, you're good.
Jeez. All right.
You've been on video the whole time.
Nice.
Like all classes.
102 slides today. So let's get at it. Yeah, this is easy. This is a nice domain for me because, I have a technical background. So people that have a, fairly solid technical background, this is an easy domain. So I love this one because I don't need to have the book to teach it as much. Whereas like, you remember the security architecture one, we're talking about Bell, Padgel, and Biba. I mean, you got to use the book. I don't ever do any of that stuff. So this will be a good domain. This is what we talked about last Thursday. We talked about, the physical security stuff. So we're going to recover or regroup. What's the word? Review that. Get used to that tonight. We're going to review this with the quiz. So we'll start here. Have you guys, anybody done this yet? Done the quiz? Okay, let's do it. So low humidity in a data center can cause what problem? Corrosion, airborne contaminants, heat, or static? Static, yeah, that was good. What should not be used to extinguish a Class C fire? What? Which one was that?
Oh,
Computer, electrical.
It
it is.
See?
See? I told you that. It's
Brad's
works,
good.
doesn't it?
Brad's gonna be leading the class on the 9th, so he did good.
I should probably look and see what that is.
All right, so electrical, soda acid, CO2, Energen, or Fe13. Which one? Soda acid? Bam, somebody's got it. So what is the primary drawback of using dogs as a perimeter control? Training, cost, liability, appearance? C. Unless you got ugly dogs, then it'd be appearance.
Treats, you gotta give them treats.
Lots of treats. That's true. I got 2 little dogs. I got a Morkie and a Maltese. Combined, they're, 7 pounds, right? But they think they're one of these dogs. Can you imagine just having them run around? They'd be so. Yeah. What type of network cable should be used to eliminate the chance of crosstalk? We're going to cover this more too. Not today, but probably next. I think Thursday we'll wrap up this domain and hit this. So shielded twisted pair, unshielded twisted pair, coax, or fiber optic. D would be the best to eliminate crosstalk. A would reduce crosstalk, but I think D is your best answer. Because fiber optic doesn't use electrical signals, it uses light pulses. So that would be the right one there. Which of the following is an administrative control? Locks, asset tracking, biometrics, or fire alarms? Yeah, it really could kind of fit either one, any one of these into an administrative control, depending on how you're using it. But the best answer here is B, asset tracking. Which halon replacement is considered the safest, breathable in concentrations up to 30%? Energen, Fe13, FM200, or argon? Argon sounds the coolest though. Fe13. What is the most important goal of a fire suppression system? Preservation of critical data, safety of personnel, building integrity, quickly extinguishing a fire. B, yep. Anytime you can see safety on the test, it's going to be the answer. Safety is always number one. EMI issues such as crosstalk primarily impact which aspect of security? Confidentiality, integrity, availability, or authentication. So you've been on the phone, heard other people's conversations. It's more of a confidentiality issue. Yeah. What is the recommended agent for extinguishing a kitchen grease fire? Which would be a type what? K, right on. Dry powder, soda acid, wet powder, or wet chemical. A? Think so? I think it's D. Wet chemical. I am smart, yeah. Thank you. I prefer to think of myself as a genius. But it's nice when other people recognize that. So. Yeah. What is the most important step in performing or to perform while selecting a fire suppression system? Industry research. Visit sites with controls who are considering have an expert, consult local fire codes, call your insurance company. I gave you kind of two big tips last week, and one was safety always comes first. The other one is if you have the opportunity to consult with the expert, consult with the expert.
Can you go back a couple to the crosstalk?
Bam, 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 bam. This one?
Book says it's B.
Book's a liar. Yeah, I don't know. I still think it's A because it's the confidential. I can hear somebody else's conversation. What's their justification for why it's B? Okay. Because crosstalk isn't an issue of data integrity because I wouldn't change the data.
Could bits be scrambled?
You could. You could. I suppose, yeah, maybe more context to the question. But that would make it, if they're speaking of it that way, then I could see it being integrity. But I always think of like the telephone conversation when I can hear somebody else's conversation, because you're basically getting data on one wire crossing over into the other wire. Huh? Sure. Yep. So yeah, maybe B if, I guess it depends on, if that's the.
So what's the test? Say the answer.
I would say A.
Is that the test then?
I don't know. I didn't write the test. Yes, and I guarantee it.
It's driving.
Yeah. Bring me evidence it was something different, then I don't know. I still think it's A. So this one, expert. A CRT device is different from a CCD device. In which way? CRT is an analog display, CCD is digital camera. This one's a little bit funky because it's a device, it's not a display. So CRT is a display too, right? The cathode ray tube display. But in the book, we also have the CRT devices, the recorders that are also referred to as CRT when they're analog. So in this instance, and this is the question as it is in the book, right? So analog display, digital camera, digital display, analog camera, that's backwards. Analog camera, digital camera, that seems to be like the right answer. And D is also incorrect. So I think the best answer here is C. Wait, Dan Warren, yes, C, do you agree? Which is not a valid method for detecting smoke or flame. Temperature is, it doesn't detect the smoke or the flame. It actually, temperature detects what comes from the smoke or the flame. Ionization, photoelectric, and ultraviolet are all ways to detect flames or smoke. So the right answer here is A. What type of sprinkler system would be best for an art gallery? Wet pipe, dry pipe, deluge, or pre-action? Well, the pre-action in these locations, right? Because we want to have the ability to turn the water off before the second piece hits. So it's got a kind of a built-in safety. One, the alarm usually triggers the release of water into the pipe, and then maybe melting the bulb would release the water onto the actual. So two things have to happen, which means we have a lot less false positives with the pre-action, right? Those other ones are all single action. So I think it's D. You get why that is?
That's a good example of one. There's two, technically you want a dry pipe system.
Right.
So it doesn't leak. So that's the correct answer, but it's not the best answer.
Very true. Yep. So you need to discard magnetic hard drives containing personally identifiable information. Which method for removing personally identifiable information from the magnetic hard drives is considered best? Overwrite every sector on each drive with zeros. delete sensitive files, degauss and destroy or reformat the hard drives. C is the best, right? Physical destruction is really the only way to ensure the data has been destroyed. That's the only one that has that. The degaussing is nice too. So how do dry pipe systems work? The sprinkler heads are open water releases when the deluge valve is opened by a fire alarm. That sounds like a deluge system. So they release water into the pipes when the fire alarm triggers. The water releases once the sprinkler head opens. Sounds pretty accurate. The pipes contain water. Dry pipes don't contain water, so we can cross that one off. The water is held back by a valve, which remains closed as long as sufficient air pressure remains in the pipes. The valve opens once the sprinkler head opens and air pressure drops in the pipes. D seems like the best answer. Do you agree? And D is still the best answer. You must have doubled that slide. So some current stuff. It's good to know that we got that one twice. I think we get double credit for that one. Okay, so communication and network security. This is what we're going to cover. It's going to be for yous who ain't technical. This is going to be hard, harder. Just a lot of memorization, right? Because you haven't worked with networks before. You haven't worked with the OSI model before or TCP/IP. So a lot of this will seem foreign. We have to go sort of fast to get through it all. But that's okay. I encourage you to keep trying. Don't give up just because it's difficult. So if you don't have a technical background, if you do have a technical background, this will refresh your memory on some of the basics that maybe you've forgotten as you've been working on the network or what have you. So secure network architecture and design, secure network devices and protocols, and secure communications. So we'll start off with the OSI model. There are 7 layers in the OSI model. This is a conceptual model. It's not a hard and fast way that networks are architected or built, but they are things are mapped to the OSI model. So physical data link, network, transport, session, presentation, application. I always work on the way down just because that's the way I always remembered it. So application, presentation, session, transport, network, data link, physical, right? So depending on how you flipped it, I like it going down like application, because application is the most complicated functions happen at the application layer. As you work down the layers of the OSI model to physical, that's the most basic functions of the network, right? It's electrical impulses or, blinks of light, happen there. I think of the data link as being the bridge between logical and physical. So it takes the logical stuff that happens in the higher layers and gets it ready for format onto the physical media. So the cable itself is a physical layer piece. Now, I like to use that word bridge. The data link bridges that, because also what operates at data link layers is what's called a bridge or a switch, right? A switch is nothing more than a multi-port bridge, whatever. We're going to get into all this. So I don't like it this way. I like it the other way. And that's kind of what I'll be covering as we go. We'll see application, presentation, session, transport, network, data link, physical. So the TCP/IP model is simpler. It's 4 layers. And the 4 layers are mapped to roughly to the 7 layers. The highest layer here is the application layer, which covers kind of the top 3 layers of the OSI model. Transport, the next layer. Now, internet, kind of the next 2 layers, and then network access is kind of the physical map. But we'll see how that's mapped too. Now, the TCP/IP model it's a model, and it's also a suite of protocols. Right? Protocols are rules for communication on the network. So this is all just summary right now. We're going to get into this a lot more. Some other definitions that we'll need to become familiar with: a packet switch network, the opposite or the difference. There's packet switch networks and there's circuit switch networks. Packet switch networks are what most of us are using every single day, and a TCP/IP, the internet, is a packet switch network. Packets are switched independently, right? And then they're assembled at the location, or at the destination. It's usually a more efficient and faster method, not faster, more efficient. On a circuit switch network, you build a circuit, an end-to-end communication, and then all your packets go on that, right? That's not as efficient. It's faster because all the packets go, up through the same route through the network, but it's inefficient because that circuit stays up whether it's being used or not, right? So Packet switch and circuit switch. We'll need to know the differences between those two when we get to the exam. Switches operate at layer 2. So layer 2 of the OSI model. We'll cover the OSI model a lot more. Routers operate at layer 3. We call switches break up what are called collision domains. That's where packets collide on the network. Routers break up broadcast domains. So if you ever hear, somebody say broadcast domain, they're talking layer 3 segmentation, a VLAN, something like that happens at layer 3. Packet filter and stateful inspection firewalls, they both operate completely different. A packet filter is a very simple firewall, and we're going to get, again, this is summary stuff, kind of intro stuff. A packet filter firewall just makes decisions based on packets. It doesn't have any context of previous packets or where you're at in the data stream, whereas a stateful packet inspection firewall would maintain a state for the communication. So they would be able to put packets into context with other packets and make decisions. So I would expect my stateful packet inspection firewall to be more effective in protecting the network than just a packet switch firewall. A packet switch firewall is like an old Cisco router that I just put an access control list on. All the firewalls now that are sold as firewalls are all either gateways, right? So they operate on all layers of the OSI model, or they're stateful packet inspection firewalls. You ones you have at home are like that. Okay, so far so good. Who's technical here? So this is like, duh, got this? Okay. I kind of have to go at the same speed that everybody's kind of absorbing. So carrier sense multiple access, that's a way to access the network. There's two types. There's collision avoidance and collision detection. They operate slightly differently, but there's this carrier sense that happens first. So first, before I put any data on the network, I'm first going to see if there's any data on the network that my data is going to collide with. That's the carrier sense. Multiple access means that they're all kind of operating in that same way. Collision detection and collision avoidance is just what I'm doing with what I'm sensing before I put data on the network. All Ethernet is collision detection. So carrier sense multiple access collision detection. The only one that I remember that's collision avoidance, well, actually there's two. They're collision avoidance. AppleTalk, if you ever remember, AppleTalk is an old protocol that made it really inefficient. And wireless networks are collision avoidance. Cool. Piece of cake. So network architecture and design, focusing on deploying a defense in depth strategy. Now, we have a saying in our business, most networks are set up like a crunchy shell and a GUI center, right? So once you get in from that frontline defense, there's no defense in depth. I can move laterally in the network. I can move wherever I want to in the network. So most people understand the defense in depth concept. They have a lot of trouble putting this into play. You'll see that when we get to, so the concept is if one control is compromised, there's another control to pick up the slack, right? Another mitigating control. And if I get through that one, there's another mitigating control. So there's a bunch of controls that work together to try to protect or detect or correct my network. That's the defense in depth concept. See, like that, what does that look like? That looks like a gobstopper, right? So when I think of defense in depth on a network, I'm thinking gobstopper. What I typically see is like a Rolo, right? Kind of it's not even crunchy on the outside. It's just kind of gooey on the outside too, but it's really gooey on the inside. You guys ever had a Rolo before? That's how most people architect their network. We want them to do gobstoppers. You can see these are multiple different technologies that I can implement in a network. Now this is very technology centric, but you could also apply these same things to administrative controls, to protect the network. So advanced threat protection, ATP, intrusion detection, prevention. We're going to talk about that. Web security, email, forensic analysis, data loss prevention, blah, 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 right? They all work, hopefully, together well. So communications, fundamentals still. We talked a little bit last week about simplex communication. That's a one-way communication. It's a one-way channel. It's for me talking to you. You don't get to talk back to me. It's like the radio that you listen to in the car. That's a simplex communication. It comes from one direction. Half duplex is bidirectional, but it's one direction at a time. And they use the analogy of like a walkie-talkie. That's a half duplex communication. And then full duplex communication is like when I'm having a conversation with somebody, we're both talking sort of at the same time, potentially. Now, most communications today are full duplex. If you've set up networks before, then you may have had to hard code this. Some of the hardest troubleshooting in networks is when you didn't set hard code and set full duplex, and you set it to, because the vendors like Cisco would try to detect if this is a half duplex or a full duplex communication. And if it defaulted to half duplex and the other one was full duplex, you'd get all kinds of weird, funky network stuff, and it was really hard to troubleshoot. But anyway, so you get the idea between simplex, half duplex, and full duplex. So baseband and broadband, most of us are using broadband networks now, so there's multiple channels going across. That's the big thing between baseband and broadband. One's single channel, the other one's multi-channel. So like your coax that you have coming into your home, you're running, sometimes you get voice, you can get voice over that, you can get video, you can get network, internet traffic, those multiple channels. That's a broadband communication. Baseband communications have one signal at a time. Ethernet networks are baseband. There's an example. We'll have a table a little bit later where we'll want to kind of memorize, what 1,000 base T means. So 1,000 base T is 1,000 megabits per second, or a gigabit per second. Baseband and then twisted pair, unshielded twisted pair. So you can tell by if I've installed a 1,000 base T, Ethernet network, that's what we're talking about. Cool. Analog, digital. Who brought that up? Somebody brought that up. Analog and digital. Yeah. Analog is non-discrete, so that's wavelengths. It's people. People are analog creatures, right? We're never black and white. It's always different shades of gray. That's analog. Harder to secure because it's not discrete. It's not black and white. Digital communications are bits. It's either on or off. Talk about like TCP/IP, right? Each bit, it's either on or it's off. There are 32 bits on an IP address and broken up into octets and all that stuff. Computers operate digitally, right? The old phone lines, that's all analog. We had to take those analog signals and translate those into digital so the computer could talk and then translate them back. The modems did that for us. Yeah. Now, over time, and I don't think we're going to talk about it today because I can't remember, but you'll see attenuation. So when that signal starts to get weaker and weaker and weaker and less discrete over a long, usually the cable is too long, that's called attenuation, the signal loss. Shut the door. Oh, is it cold? We need that. Stay awake.
Let's finish that. Just Rob's not here to do it.
That's right. No Rob. LANs, WANs, man scans, and PANs. Right. So PANs, personal area networks, usually 100 meters or less. Very low power devices. Bluetooth is an example of a personal area network. Local area networks are what a lot of us do. That's what we have here. It's one location, usually within one building. So one small area. Metropolitan area network, where we bring multiple buildings in the same metropolitan area together. Usually it's an inter network of LANs, right? So LANs together, form the metropolitan area network. WANs, wide area network, a larger geographic dispersion between the locations would be a wide area network. And then a global area network, again, we have multiple WANs, right? Simple. Internet, intranet, extranet, inter and intra. Inter means between, intra means within. So that's the key to understanding what these networks, kind of how these networks work. Internet, a global connection of peered networks. That's, I'm not even going to go into how that is, but I mean how complex the internet has become. But it. Running TCP/IP, so we're going to go through the TCP/IP protocol suite a little bit. You're going to need to know, why TCP, how TCP works versus UDP, kind of the basics again. application layer protocols, all that kind of stuff. But TCP/IP, the internet with a capital I is TCP/IP. Best effort service is no guarantee that my traffic is going to get from point A to point B. The intranet is a privately known. It's a collection of potentially internal networks, but it's privately owned. TCP/IP, such as a company network, and extranet, private intranets connected together, but not fully internet because it's still restricted. Cool. I feel like I'm just up here talking, looking for some interaction from the crowd. What? Simplex. This is simplex, and now we have initiated half duplex, right? Well, now that you're laughing, and I'm seeing that you're laughing, and you're seeing that I'm smiling, now we're doing full duplex right now. It's beautiful. I like that. So circuit switch network. So circuit switch network, how these work is you build the circuit. So it may not be a permanent virtual circuit. We'll talk about PVCs later on, but essentially a circuit is established between two nodes, and that's dedicated to the communication between those two nodes, traditionally whether traffic is on it or not. So it does provide dedicated bandwidth. It's more resilient. No, not more resilient. That's not the word I'm looking for. More predictable network performance in a circuit switch network. So that's why voice communications work nice over a circuit switched network because it's sort of predictable. Pretty high performance. I can, use it that way. But the big drawback on circuit switch networks is, it's wasted. Sometimes the circuit itself can be wasted, be tied up in a circuit establishment and not be used for actual communications, right? Packet switch networks, however, think of like a web of interconnectivity, and the data is sent from point A and it needs to get to point B. It's going to be broken down into packets or chunks of data that get sent onto the network, and they may take different routes to get to their destination. Right? It's a connection. Usually, it's kind of a connectionless network, but the data is broken into packets, and each are sent individually. If multiple routes are available between 2 points, this is a very resilient network. That's why the internet was built this way, because if any one section of the internet goes down, it can reroute another way. Missing packets can be retransmitted. TCP, that's what would happen. There would be an acknowledgement, and that traffic would be resent. Unlike circuit switch networks, their unused bandwidth is used up, right? So that's the difference between circuit switched and packet switched. Pretty basic stuff. For you network people out there, is this all just refresher stuff? Did you remember this? Because we don't do this anymore. I mean, they don't think this way. But it reminds me of the days of, what was Cisco's big book back then? It was the Bible of inner networking.
I see these.
Yeah, even a little bit before that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we used to prepare for your CCNP way back when. So QoS, quality of service. Some data is more important than other data. And the classic data is voice data. It's not as the packets need to get there quickly, otherwise you get that lag time, or you get jitter in the line. So packet switch networks may use quality of service. It's just it's a switch in the packet that it identifies it as preferred traffic. It's often applied to voice over IP traffic, so there's no interruption in the communications. So quality of service, we don't need to get really deep into QoS. Bless you. That you know what it is. So we're still in fundamental network concepts. We haven't even dug into anything yet. So models such as OSI model and TCP/IP, two models, one's 7 layers, one's 4. They kind of map together. Each layer performs a specific function. So it hides the complexity like we talked about before. We talked about encapsulation. We talked about secure architecture. It's the same concept. As data goes down the protocol stack, there are headers and footers in some cases that are appended and prepended to the data, but there's also a hiding of the complexity that happens at each layer. So if I'm writing an application, I don't know, writing a web application, I don't have to worry about the, how the network driver works. That's a layer 2, function. I don't need to worry about the actual electrical impulses. I don't have to write that into my application. So the layer design hides the complexity between the layers. Changes in one layer don't directly affect another, so I can switch out a network adapter card and load a new driver and not have to install new applications, because of the layered functionality, layered design. Models and stacks. Model is just how the protocol suite operates. So protocols are rules for communications. Network stack is a network protocol suite programmed in software and hardware. Protocols, the rules. It's how we're going to talk. We all speak English. We have our own protocol here and how we speak, because we're in Minnesota, we speak different. Like, you ever gone down south and talked and asked for, can I get a pop? Like, say what? And everything down there is a Coke, right? They have a different protocol for speaking. It's the same thing with computers and computer systems. So the OSI model, a layered network model, it's abstract, not directly. We don't directly run OSI on our systems. Layer 1, physical, is universally understood as 7 layers, developed by ISO. Formerly, that's what it was called, the X.200 Information Technology Open, so blah, blah, blah. That's the website if you want to reference it. We're going to cover everything you need for the OSI model here. So you can see the data units. So this is kind of a nice diagram, because I always seem to forget segments. Is that the transport, packets? Where are those? Segments are on the transport layer, packets are on the network layer, frames are on the data link layer, and bits are on the physical layer. Everything else above that is data, which is nice because there's not actually any data appended until you get to the transport layer. Right, so at that point, it's all just data. It's gone through some translation and in preparing it for the network. But when it gets to the transport layer, that's when you see the first header being added to, the data that's going to transverse the wire. Then at the packet, that's where I'm going to add my routing information, maybe a little bit of flow control stuff. The frames, that's where I'm going to break it down into basically package it to be sent in either blinks or electrical impulses. So that's kind of a nice, I like that one. The other one is we're going to use that other, diagram to dig a little bit deeper into it. But I like that. That's a nice one to remember. So everybody needs to remember the order. So that's one that people don't like to see, don't need to see Paula Abdul. So if you want to remember the OSI layers, sometimes people have struggle with this. If you're a network person who's done this 1,000 times, you don't necessarily use those anymore. Now, people don't need those stupid packets anyway. People do not teach students pointless acronyms, or please do not teach people useless acronyms. These are useful ones, right? Please do not take salespeople's advice. Sorry, salespeople. Sometimes that's a good thing. All right. So any questions on that? That's easy. You'll need to memorize that. You'll need to know the layers of the OSI model if you don't already. If it doesn't, if you can't just spit it out, then still study it.
The diagram or table is really good, covering what you need to know.
This one?
The OSI, the green.
Yeah.
It's up there that has all the information.
Mm-hmm.
In one easy to understand. So that's a good study.
Yeah,
guide.
I agree. And I have a better one coming up too.
Oh.
I think, I know, right?
I can hardly wait.
Yeah, woo!
You need to know which protocols are in
Yes.
each layer as well.
You do. Yep, you do need to know which protocols are in each layer. But we'll get to that when we get to TCP/IP model, because it applies more there. So layer 1, physical. This is the simplest layer of the OSI model. So describes units of data such as bits. So it's kind of the dumbest layer too. When you think about it, there's nothing that really gets operated on with the data here. So bits represented by energy such as light, electricity, radio waves. So light would be in our fiber optic cables. Electricity would be in our unshielded twisted pair or shielded twisted pair cables, coax cables. Radio waves would be like either Wi-Fi or microwave signals. and the medium used to carry them, such as copper, fiber optic cables. Cabling standards, such as thin net, thick net, unshielded, twisted pair, those are all layer one, functions. Essentially, because I have to plug it in, right? So I have to map the device itself. So the dumbest device that you can have on your network is a hub or a repeater. Now, a repeater is just a single port hub, right? Takes data in one side, it regenerates the signal and sends it out the other side. So the only place I'd ever use a repeater would be to extend a line further, which would protect against attenuation, right? The weakening of the signal as it goes further out from the source. And hubs, only time I'd ever use a hub is if I was, trying to capture network traffic. Because hubs are dumb. They don't, what comes in one port gets forwarded out all the other ports. So if I use a hub as the backbone of my network, I'll have so many collisions on my network, it'll grind to a halt in, I don't know, a few seconds maybe. I don't know. I've never done that anymore. But we still find hubs from time to time. They're also a security hazard because now if I'm hooked up to a switch and I do packet capture, what data do I see? I only see the data that's coming down that switch port, which is only data that's been ARPed to me, right? We'll talk about ARP, but there's a limitation on what I can see in that data stream. Whereas if I use a hub, I can see everything, depending on what that hub's connected to. So we would use the hub for a tap for network traffic monitoring, or a hub for maybe putting an IDS or an IPS in place. So they still have a function, but we typically don't like hubs. There's no network control. There's no security around it. But hubs operate at layer one. Binary transmission. That's how the English say it, isn't it? Yeah, have some binary with your crumpets. It's getting late. Yeah, okay. At least we can laugh at when we're going through the OSI model together. It's rare. So layer two, data link. So I think of layer two as being the bridge from the logical to the physical, right? It just makes sense to me. I mean, I don't have any trouble remembering where bridges fit in the OSI model, but if you ever have problems remembering where bridges fit, it's at the data link layer. There's two layers in the data link layer. There's the logical link control and the media access control sub-layers, just to add to the confusion. One is essentially preparing the data that comes from the network layer. And the other one is essentially framing it and getting it ready for transmission. So handles data handles access to the physical layer and the layer of the local area connection. Ethernet card has a MAC address, so you see media access control. That MAC address is a hardwired address. You can change it in software, but it used to be it was all hardwired. But MAC addresses operate at layer two, hardware addressing. There's a translation that has to take place between the logical addressing and the physical addressing. Address resolution protocol is the protocol that does that. So switches and bridges operate at layer two. And the difference between, so the way a bridge works, I don't know if we go into it now. We can go into it now. So a bridge would sit between two networks. It's just a bridge is just a two-port switch, right? And a switch is a multi-port bridge. So they do the same function, but bridges are easier to explain. You just take it and apply it to multiple ports if you want to know what the switch does. But a bridge builds a MAC address table, right? It listens on the network to find out, okay, these MAC addresses are over on this side, these MAC addresses are over on this side. So if this computer wants to communicate with another computer with this MAC address, I'll look in my MAC address table and say, does it go over here or can it stay over there? Right, so it breaks up that collision domain based on the two ports. Does that make sense? So you take that same concept to switches. Switches will only forward data to the port that has the MAC address associated with it. And if it doesn't have it in its MAC address table, it'll broadcast out all ports to build that MAC address table entry. Does that make sense? So then I've reduced the collisions that happen on my network. Right? Switches will make some intelligent decisions on which port am I going to send this data to based on what I've stored in my MAC address table. You can, switches can either learn their MAC addresses or you can hard code them in. So media access control, transfer the data to and from the physical layer. So that's the lower of the two, logical link control, media access control. Logical link control is essentially taking that data from layer 3 and preparing it, for the frame. Simple. So data link layer provides a reliable transfer of data across the media, physical addressing, network topology, network topology operates at layer 2. So Ethernet is defined at layer 2. So is frame relay. So is, what else would be? That's about it. Ethernet, everything's Ethernet now, essentially. Used to be, we'd have FIDI and a bunch of others that we had to deal with, but anyway. So the network. So as we're getting up, there's increased functions and functionality that happens, higher up the OSI model. So layer 3 is really about, it's kind of the police officer, I guess, of the protocol suite. It does the routing, so it determines, how I'm going to get data from point A to point B across maybe a large network, multiple networks. So it describes routing. IP addresses and routers. Even though IP address isn't mapped directly to the OSI model, the network layer of the TCP/IP model is mapped to the network layer of the OSI model. So it's safe to say that IP is on the layer 3, right? So we say layer 3 segmentation, we're talking about here. We'd have to use a router to get from one network to another if we're doing layer 3 segmentation, which would be VLANs. Even though VLANs operate sort of at layer 2, I have to go above that layer to get from one VLAN to the other VLAN. Does that make sense? All right. Protocols include IP version 4 and IP version 6. There's other, when we talk about IP, ICMP also works here, IGRP works here, IGMP works here. There's others protocols. We'll talk about that in a bit. So the network provides connectivity and path selection between two end systems, domain of routing. So routing breaks up a broadcast domain, and switches break up a collision domain. Does that make sense? I mean, maybe that doesn't make sense, but we don't have to go any further than that about what routing domains are and switching domains. Routing domains or broadcast domain, I'll have to go into it real quick anyway. So in a VLAN, if there's broadcast traffic, all that traffic stays within the VLAN, right? If I want to go from one network to another, I have to go across a router. So layer 3 separates those broadcast domains, right? There's also broadcasts that happen at layer 2, but those are not what I'm talking about. Those would be like address resolution protocol broadcasts, which is essentially a computer saying, hey, who's got this IP address? Because I need to communicate with you. And there'll be one computer out there that'll say, hey, I got that MAC address. Okay, now I know where to send that data. And then our poisoning would be, if I say I've got it too, and I'm not really the guy that has that, I can poison the ARP table, so then you'll start communicating with me and you won't broadcast anymore to find out if this other guy's even there, right? That's how ARP poisoning works. Layer 4, transport, packet sequencing. So somehow we have to put the data back together again, especially on a packet switched network. We have to figure out how to put data back together if the packets are arriving at different times. Flow control, error detection, TCP and UDP are layer 4 protocols. We refer to those as layer 4 protocols, even though they're, again, part of the TCP IP protocol suite, not necessarily OSI protocols. TCP and UDP, we'll talk a little bit about those. TCP is connection oriented, UDP is connection less. UDP is faster, TCP is more reliable. TCP's got overhead, right? You got SYN-ACK and ACK-BACK, right? For the three-way handshake, that happens at TCP. UDP doesn't have anything like that. We will get into that a little bit more. Yeah, so all those things happen on layer 4. So therefore, concerned with transportation issues between hosts, data transport reliability, establish, maintain, terminate virtual circuits, fault detection and recovery, and information flow control. That's all layer 4 stuff. Now you don't need to know all the details of this. This is more for your information. What you do need to know is things like this, what's on these slides. This is just, again, more for your reference. If you really want to master it more, this is what's going to be on the test, okay? So I don't want you to worry about, holy crap, you don't have to worry about that. But it's good if the more I understand the things that are around something, the better I understand the thing That's the app, you know what I mean? So it should help a little bit. So session layer, sessions, providing maintenance and connections, RPCs, answer, are here, remote procedure calls. Good way to remember the session layer's functions is connections between applications. This is where simplex, half duplex, and full duplex are all sort of agreed upon at the session layer. There's also that same thing happens at layer 2 also. Yeah, it's maintaining the session. It's not so much about routing. It's more a logical two computers, kind of agreeing to how they're going to talk on the network. The next layer down, or the transport layer, is more okay. How are we going to greet each other, and how are we going to set up this communication? This is more the actual session, is the actual communication. Does that help? So establishes, manages, terminates sessions between applications. The presentation is more of a translation layer. It's a transitive layer. Compression happens here, JPEG, GIF. Encryption often happens here. A lot of things like that happen at the presentation layer. So, but it's preparing the data now. It's kind of taking it off the network. Now we need to present it to the application for rendering to the user, right? The end user, the GUI, the user interface is the application layer. Yep, good stuff. This is where you interface with the application. It's the application layer. It's what you see. It's the browser. And everything that kind of goes with it. Protocols. There's a lot of protocols at the application layer. Telnet, FTP, SFTP, SMTP, HTTP, NTP. There's a lot of them, man. Just do anything with a TP, you'll be pretty close to something. Provides network services to application processes. That's the application layer. Any questions on that? There's a couple more mnemonics if you're into those things. These are the classic ones. Please do not throw sausage pizza away.
Please do not take salespeople's advice.
Or please do not tell salespeople anything.
Yeah.
We're just ripping on salespeople. We have salespeople in here too, and they're like, seriously. What?
Please do not trust salespeople.
No, me.
anytime.
I understand the value. It's the other salespeople, those ones that are selling the FUD stuff that nobody needs. All people seem to need data processing. That's a classic one too. It's operating kind of the other way. This is a good graphic here. I like this one a lot because it kind of has everything built into it. So this is one that I would reference, if I were to reference any of them. Yeah, it's very good. I've got what operates at each layer. So here, hubs operate at layer 1, switches, bridges operate at layer 2, routers at layer 3. Really, there are no other devices that are separated. Now it becomes gateways that are operated at all layers. Those are things that can make decisions based on what's in the full protocol stream, the full data stream. Now, the reason why I don't have stuff that operates up here is because really this is all kind of the data stuff. I don't really add anything to the packet till I get here. This is right in the first header. So there's really nothing to operate on yet. But you can also see packet filtering happens in here. And then you see the DoD model, which is also referred to as the TCP/IP model, and how that maps to the whole layer, right? This is a really nice graphic. I like this one. It gets, it has a definition of kind of what happens at each one of these layers. It tells me some of the protocols that operate each layer. Yeah, you like that? That's a nice one. I like that one.
One thing with the protocols that I found really helpful is if it's a protocol with I, starts with I, it's going to be a network. You don't even have to put IGP, ICP,
That's true.
IP.
It's true.
So you just don't have to think any of these tricks that you don't have to think about what it is.
I'm gonna try to think about it.
There are some that are not, but from the test
Yeah, too.
perspective, I'm going to clarify that.
So there's one.
Ah,
All right, that'll be the task. Figure out a protocol that's not in layer 3 that starts with I.
ICMP, IGMP, IGRP, IPv4 and 6, IPsec, and IPX.
That's all right.
Yeah.
There's got to be an I that works.
Nope. That's it.
IKE.
I what?
IKE.
It's,
Yeah. No,
it runs over IPsec.
it does. All right.
How I remembered it, because that was not my wheelhouse.
That is a good.
That is the greatest thing. I don't have to think about that.
That is a good way to remember it. Note all those protocols do operate at layer 3, so it's accurate too. SPX operates at the transport layer,
Yeah.
but we don't use
That's it,
IPX,
yeah.
SPX anymore. Yeah. Yeah. It's maybe a good way to remember it. There's got to be something.
There's gotta be something.
Bring it.
Bring it. What you got? It's a TCP IP model. So we've been talking about the OSI model. Now TCP, makes this a little more practical for us. This is, if you're a network person, this is the protocol suite that you've probably mastered. You can subnet in your head, right? Supernet in your head. That's cool. So TCP IP, what stands for Transmission Control Protocol and Internet Protocol, which are actually two protocols in the protocol suite. Transmission Control Protocol is that TCP that we were talking about. It's connection oriented, rides at the network layer. No, it doesn't. Rides at the the layer up from that. Thank you. And then the Internet Protocol is also just a protocol. So it's the protocol suite named after those two protocols. Really, it was originally defined in DARPA. So that's the Defense. It's easier to say DARPA. And is this a Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency in the 1970s? It was a protocol that was developed for the military. It was for them to have resilient communications. It then became kind of this internet thing. And the cool thing about the internet is it's not governed by any one person or any one group. There are rules for operating on the internet, which are defined in the RFCs. Is that one of the, no, there's no RFCs there, but those are the rules for kind of that we generally agree upon when we're communicating, but there's a lot of communications that take place that are outside of RFCs. Like for instance, if I tunnel attack traffic encrypted over port 80, right? The RFC for HTTP is that HTTP traffic runs on port 80. So that would be a violation of the RFC, but that doesn't mean I have to play by the rules, right? And so, that's kind of the good and the bad with the internet is, there are rules to play by, but it doesn't mean I have to play by them. Suite of protocols, including UDP. So UDP is the partner and friend of TCP. ICMP, the Internet Control Message Protocol, which is kind of the message protocol. It's nice because it's the message protocol for IP. Sort of like the traffic cop for IP. It's informing everybody, source quench, we're backed up right now. We can't really forward any more traffic, or MTU size exceeded, can't fragment the packet. It would send that back to the host and say, resend with a smaller packet size. Stuff like that happens with ICMP. Ping works ICMP. It's all that good stuff. So some sources use the link layer in place of the network access layer, and the network layer in place of the internet layer. Those are just whatever you prefer. This is the map. So application transport, internet, and network access layer. The big protocols that really we focus, 90% of our time is in the transport layer and the internet layer and application layer, I suppose. We don't do much work usually at the network access layer. We'll get into all that. But you can see how they map to the OSI model. Pretty simple. So the network access layer combines layer 1 and layer 2. Same concepts that we have with the OSI model, right? Taking the data, putting it on the wire, getting it from, preparing it for that. Also, we have converting bits protocols to Ethernet frames, media access control address. So that's the MAC address. That's the hardware address. And network interface cards all are in the network access layer. So what happens at the internet layer, those are logical addresses, right? Those are IP addresses. So there needs to be a translation that takes place from the logical address to the physical address that resides here. And that's the address resolution protocol that we talked about briefly. Networks include wide area networks, local area networks, and internet are all kind of network access layery things. The internet layer, gosh, I've been talking too much today. Yeah. What?
Need a break, let me know.
La 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 la.
Don't waste
What do they do in they prepare to sing?
Yeah, how about
Do something like that. So the internet layer, lines layer 3, the OSI model, IP addresses work here. IP addresses, everybody good at IP addressing, know how to do subnetting. We're going to get into that a little bit. We'll get into classes center domain routing and RFC 1918, which is really where we started naming private addresses because we were running out of IP address space. IP version 4, IP version 6, ICMP, routing protocols, so EIGRP, IGRP, OSPF, those are all protocols here. Internet protocol governs the internet layer, so everything has to go through IP. That's why it's kind of in the name. Best path determination, packet switching, all those things happen here. Host-to-host transport layer, more commonly called transport alone. Internet layer to the application layer. We do this through what are called ports and sockets. Where applications are addressed on a network via ports. TCP and UDP are 2 transport layer protocols. We'll dig into that more. We'll talk about what a socket is and ports and all that good stuff. This is, pretty basic stuff. TCP, connection oriented, so this is a reliable transport layer protocol. The unreliable one is its cousin, UDP. Supports dialogues between source and destination, packages application information into segments. So that one reference that we had where we had segments, packets, frames, and bits. This is segmentation, segments. Provides reliable full duplex transmission, flow control, windowing, acknowledgements. Those are all in the TCP header, which we'll show in, I think, pretty soon. We'll show out the TCP header, what data is actually in the header, what flags are used, and what have you. UDP, user datagram protocol. This is best effort communications. This is like the post office, right? You send something via the post office without like somebody signing for it. It's like best effort, man. You don't know if it really got there or not. That's how UDP works. Whereas TCP would be like using like FedEx with like a bunch of signatures and everything. So it's tracked every step of the way, and you get that tracking number, and you can see when they picked it up and when they routed it. UDP is like the post office. Does not provide flow control, no windowing, no acknowledgements. It's also very fast though. It's lightweight. It doesn't have a lot of the overhead with TCP. So maybe UDP is good for, where I've handled these things at the application layer or on a reliable network, or where I can handle packet loss. And just not every packet has to get there. The application layer, layer 5 through 7. So in our OSI model, that was session, presentation, and application. Client server architecture, yeah. So most communications happen in a client server architecture. So a server is listening on a specific port. There's an application listening on the other end of that, TCP port or even a UDP port. That's the server portion. If I want to communicate with that, I would, whatever source port I'm using, I would just address it to that destination port so that the application on the other side knows what application did you want to talk to, right? That's the client server piece. So SSH, anybody know what port SSH? 22, right? We like 22, we don't like 23 typically, right? Do you know why? Telnet sucks. Yeah, it's clear text, right? We like SSH is secure shell, which is TCP port 22, and we like that because it's encrypted data typically. But on the listening service, it's called a daemon or a service. And SSHD would be the SSH daemon listening. It's the name of the service in the Unix system. Clients and servers are either TCP or UDP, sometimes both. As a transport layer protocol, protocols such as SSH, Telnet, and FTP, among many others. FTP what port? 21, 20 and 21. How about HTTP? SMTP? SNMP? Oh shit. UDP, right? 61? Yeah, so I mean, whatever. So you could just keep quizzing each other. You'd probably name a bunch of protocols too that I have no idea what ports they're running on. DNS, UDP 53 and TCP 53, stuff like that. But what that is that's the port that I'm listening to. So when it goes up the protocol stack, IP knows where to hand it to, right? Oh, that's this application or that application, depending what the daemon is listening on. So the application layer called the process layer. This is the higher level protocol. So TCP is just the window into these other applications: FTP, HTTP, SMTP, TFTP, which I think is like UDP 169, SNMP, DHCP, DNS, BOOTP, DNS representation, or data representation and coding. All that higher level stuff happens here. Okay. If you want a whole list of protocols, there's an RFC for that. You know, we've got the well-known IANA, Internet Assigned Numbering Association, is who handles kind of what ports are supposed to get assigned to what applications. This is kind of a nice, if you want to see a little deeper breakdown, this won't be testable. It's more for reference stuff if you care. But you can see on the network layer. So here, let's see if we can find one with an I on somewhere else.
Wasting your time.
I say can't. I found one. IMAP.
IMAP.
For the test.
IMAP.
For the,
I know. I just wanted to see if there was one.
is that a transportation protocol?
Oh yeah, it's an application layer protocol.
Well,
Yeah, totally.
for the test.
I was just wondering. I knew there had to be something, but IMAP is a good classic one.
Yeah.
But you can see where the different protocols kind of lie on the protocol suite, like X.25, right? Dead. But that was very, very overheadish. Right? A lot of error detection, flow control on those. You see ISMP, virtual routing protocol, IGMP, and a bunch of different protocols that operate.
So the arrows mean it's based on that or something?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. UDP uses TCP and BOOTP. You know what I mean? DHCP uses UDP. IP uses either UDP or TCP. You know, yeah, it's a cool graphic. Yeah, it is a cool graphic. It's not testable, but it's good for reference if you're a network person and like these things. So encapsulation, I've already alluded to it a little bit. As things go down the protocol stack, data gets added to it. You know, headers happen. You know, when it goes from TCP, a header is added to it. An IP, there's a header added to it. When it goes to layer 2, another header is added to it. That's called encapsulation. The data is encapsulated in the layer below it. Yeah, so in de-encapsulation would be as it goes back up the protocol stack, the data gets stripped away from it. So higher layer, the data, it takes information from a higher layer and adds a header to it, treating the higher layer information as data. One layer's header is another layer's data. I guess it's one way to remember how encapsulation, but it's pretty easy to conceptualize. We saw a diagram earlier too, where if I append a header to it, that's encapsulating the data, right? Sometimes you'll add a trailer, but most of the time it's just a header. So as the data moves down the stack in time in the TCP/IP model, application data encapsulated, so on and so forth. I'm not going to read it to you. You guys can read it, right? Do you want me to read it to you? I can read it to you. You can't read it back there. Are we duplex again? I feel duplex with you right now. I feel like we're duplexing. Nice. It's good to duplex with folks. It sucks when you're just up here simplexing all the time.
I'm with you.
You're with me. All right. Well, what is it? I don't even know what it says. TCP segments encapsulate. Yeah, I've already explained encapsulation. Data segments, packets, frames, and bits are examples of protocol data units. So sometimes we hear PDUs. It's a protocol data unit. So it's at each layer. What is the protocol data unit called? So it's data till we get to layer 4, where we add the segment. So we add the header, the TCP header, the UDP header. That would be a segment then. Layer 3 is where it's a packet, right? So there I've added the routing information and whatever things that go there. The frames, so I've appended layer 2 data and then packaging it for sale, the bits. Reverse of encapsulation is called demultiplexing. I usually call it de-encapsulation. Same thing. So there's an example of encapsulation. So you can see data. Then we all of a sudden add a header, add headers. There's also a trailer added at layer 2 in this diagram, and then the 0s and 1s go across the network. And basically what it says is Evan is cool right there. That's what the 1s and 0s say here. I don't know if you guys can make that out. Do you guys speak binary? That doesn't say that at all. I don't know what it says. Yeah. Okay. Here's another example. So data, break down the data into smaller chunks, then we have their segment or packet, frame, whatever, simple. Email message. All right, so TCP IP protocol suite. So we've got IP version 4 and IP version 6. We're going to talk more about IP version 4, I think, than IP version 6. But the protocol suite is made up of those. Really, the big dogs in the TCP IP protocol suite are TCP, UDP, and really IP. Those are the big dogs. A lot of application protocols, that reside higher up. The most common ones are things like HTTP, SMTP. The SMTP is mail, port 25, HTTP, HTTPS, 443, the common ones, but you don't need to memorize a ton of them. Yeah, I'm having trouble talking now. I think I'm losing myself. Maybe we should teach the rest of this.
I'm not sure I'm going to be much better, but.
Right. So Telnet, port 23 to FTP, we've talked about that, SSH 22. Some protocols fit neatly and some kind of do, overlap. The address resolution protocol, all it does is just help. It just takes the IP, again, the logical address, makes it into a physical address so we can communicate on the network. MAC addresses, we'll need to memorize this. So unique hardware addresses. I could do our poisoning attacks, and that will be one of the attacks we'll talk about when we get to the end of this, about how our poisoning attacks works. It's really pretty simple and pretty effective. You can do it at Caribou or don't. It's unethical, but you can. It's really easy to do it, right? It's easy to do it on airport networks. Again, don't do it, but you can, because if you want to be an IC, you have to abide by the ethics. Which means you can't do that stuff anymore. The stuff you guys have been doing, it's got to stop. Yeah. Unless it's part of engagement, you have a PSA, a professional services agreement, and you're getting paid for it, right?
We're staying at APs at Starbucks.
Not now. I mean, now you can. But when you sign up for the the certification, you're gonna have to say you're not doing that anymore. And if I'm gonna endorse, if I'm gonna endorse you, I'm gonna check. Okay, and then we could write a movie about it. All right, so typically burned in at the factory, MAC addresses really are 48-bit addresses. It's 24 bits are the organizational unit identifier, which are assigned to the manufacturer. The last bits are just whatever they burn on the card. I'm sorry, who?
Who are they assigned to? You said they're assigned to the
Oh.
manufacturer, right?
IEEE.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some websites.
There you go.
can look up,
IEEE.
Identify a device.
Yeah, this is a text file that has all the old UIs that have been assigned. IP. This would be IP version 4. IP version 6 is well, actually, there's a longer one. But MAC addresses should be unique. If two different systems have the same MAC address on a local area network, then conceivably both you'll have either disruption in network traffic or both systems will receive the network traffic, which is one way you can also eavesdrop on network traffic, through our poisoning. The two halves, the first 24 bits form that OUI. The last 24 bits are a serial number that are just assigned by the manufacturer. And there's your list of MAC addresses if you want, or the OUIs anyway. Here's an example of a MAC address. So 3 bytes, 8 bits in a byte, 24 bits. With OUI, 24 bits assigned, in the factory. If you do an IF config all or an IP config all, depending on what you're on. If your IP config all and you can see a MAC address, you can override that in your network drivers. You guys have probably seen that before. Most people don't do that, but you can. I don't know why you would, but again, you can.
Unless you're on an engagement.
Unless you're on an engagement and you've been paid with a professional services agreement. MAC addresses are simple, right? need to go into more detail on that. EUI 64, so this is the extended unique identifier. So supposedly we're running out of OUIs. So I'm sorry, people like Cisco wanted more address space to assign their serial numbers to MAC addresses, so they weren't colliding. OUIs are still, because 2 to the 24th is a lot. I don't know what that is. That's a big number. So 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, 24 times is a big number. And 2 to the 40th, that means I can make a lot of MAC addresses or a lot of network interface cards, or before I start duplicating. But that's why the extended, whatever, it's on the test. 16 million for the 2 to the 24.
16.7 million.
Okay. Yeah. So now 2 to the 40 is bigger. I knew that. Talk about intelligence. I know 40 is bigger than the other number you said. 24. Thank you. IP version 4. Sometimes it really is Internet Protocol version 4. It's been around since the 70s. It wasn't built with security in mind. It was built with resilience in mind. IP version 6 came out because we were running out of IP address space. 2 to the 32nd is how many IP addresses there are in the world, routable. But then now we took some things away from that. We'll get into that. So fundamental protocol of the internet, designed in the 70s, used for ARPANET. That's the Advanced Research Projects, whatever. Simple protocol, easy. Requires a helper protocol, so we need something to communicate to help things along in terms of network congestion, routing information. ICMP is used to do that. IP is connectionless and unreliable, but requires best effort, but ICMP is there to kind of back it up. So if packets didn't go the way they were supposed to, ICMP should tell us that. If connections or reliability are required, they must be provided by the higher level protocol. So if I really need reliability, I might rely on TCP for that. That's the connection oriented. 32-bit IP address or 32-bit source and destination IP addresses, usually shown in dotted quad. I never called it dotted quad, but they're octets. There's 4 octets there. An octet is just 8 bits. So if you look at 192.168.2. 4, 192 in binary is 11 and then 6 zeros, right? That's what a 192 looks like. Do you know the bit numbers? Do you want to go through that? You guys know this? It's good to know.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. I got nothing else to do. I'm happy. It'll get me doing something else more fun. So 32 bits in an IP address, right? 4 octets. So the bit numbers go 2, 4, 8, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, right? So those are 8 bits. So if this bit is on and this bit is on, and the rest are all zeros. So that's what 192 looks like in binary. It's the other one. 168, so 168 would require this one on, and that one on. That one 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. That's 168 in binary. 2, well, they're all off except for this one. So you get used to finding. It's probably 2 more zeros now. Or just take one off. In 4s, 0, 0, 4. So this is what an IP address looks like in binary. Now it becomes important because we talk about subnet masks and we talk about how we're going to segment the network. We're going to take some bits from the network address. So this is in a standard 192.168. That's the class C, right? We've got the. You guys want me to go into more detail on this? Or are you guys getting this? This is all good, right? This is typically a /24 for noting this in CIDR format. So this right here is used for the network, and this is used for the host. Right?
All the way around.
You're right. Absolutely right. Thank you. No, you're absolutely right. So I would borrow, if I was going to subnet this network, I'd have to borrow bits from the host, right? Bring those into the network. And so depending on how many hosts, I always use this formula. You guys use that, 2 to the x minus 2. Yeah, that's how I've always subnetted. So let's say, so this right here gives me how many IP addresses? I have this whole octet here.
255, 250.
So if I added all these up,
253.
254, it's two, because if you add all these up, this equals what?
256. 256, yeah.
255?
Two.
No, it's 256.
Is that what this is?
5?
You can't use two.
What's all this added up?
But isn't that like the broadcast ones?
Yeah, so I can't use 255, and I can't use 0.
Oh, and 0. So
Right.
256.
Yeah. So, but this is why I always use 2 to the x minus 2. So this would give me 254 hosts, right? Let's say I only needed like 12 hosts. So how many bits do I need then for the host space? Right now I have 20, I have 8 of them. So 2 to the x minus 2 equals, what did I say, 24? Right? So 2 to the x minus 24. This is how many bits I'm going to need for the host address. So 2 to the x equals 26. 2, 4, 6, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. I'll need 5 bits. Right, so 2 to the 5th would give me how many I need. It would give me a little. It would give me a little more than that. Right. So what's 2 to the 5th minus 2? 2 to the 5th minus 2 is 32 minus 2. So this is going to give me 30 addresses. Or 30 usable. What am I doing?
They can't see the green. They just can't see the green on the online.
Okay. So I'm going to need 5 bits. Right now I have 8 bits that are assigned to the host. Right? It gives me 254 bits, 254 hosts for that in that address space. If I want 30, I can. All I need is to use 5 bits. Right? So I can make this a slash 32, 27. Right? And then 255, 255, 255, 128, 64, 32. 224 is my new subnet mask. 224. 256 minus 254 is what? 32. So that's where my next network starts. So I'd have 192.168.2.0, meaning that'd be one network slash 27. There's 30 hosts in this network. Right? My next network, oops, 2.32/27. Can you see that? You can't see that even worse now.
Where did you get the 27 from?
Oh, that's the CIDR notation. That's just the CIDR notation for the subnet mask. So it's 255, 255, 255, 224. And 224. Yeah. So, okay, let's go back to this. You see what I'm doing here? Oh, this is easy. This is subnetting. Subnetting kind of 101-ish. So I need this many bits to get this many IP addresses. Right? We did the math to figure that out. So these would all now be /27s. All my networks would be /27s. If I want to know where those networks kind of break down now, I just take the number 256 minus the 32, right? Because that's what I've got left over. Does that make sense? No. I did that wrong. Minus the 224. Got ahead of myself, which gives me 32. Because 220, so the 224 is, that's how many bits are used for the network. Is that making sense? Sort of? So my networks start at 32s. So my first network would be, if I wanted 32 bits, that's network number 1. So I've taken this one network and I've broken it down into additional networks, right? Network number 1 has 30 IP addresses that I can use in it. Phone. Okay. So the next network starts that would be 33, not bad. The next network started at 33? 32, my bad. I'm getting this. Next network starts at 64, 96, 128, 164, 160, sorry, 192, 224. So those are my networks. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 networks. Yeah. So taking this one network, this one class B, essentially it's a class B, a /24. I've subnetted it for 30 IP addresses on each network. These are my networks. You see, that's just subnetting. But it all comes back to this 2 to the x minus 2. That's where, if you remember that, you'll know how to subnet. Just work through the math. If you don't get it, you want to know more, we can do that. You don't need to know how to subnet for the test. It's just good stuff to know. And the reason why I would do that is it makes my network more efficient, right? Because then on the other side, I can create routing tables that are essentially supernets, more efficient routing and IP address distribution. Now I need 30 addresses on a network. You know, why waste the other 200 something IP addresses, right?
Can you tell me what kind of problems you run into when you don't do that?
Oh, you don't really. No, most people don't. Most people don't subnet much.
Okay.
Segment it.
It's more important to know, like, when somebody gives you an IP address space. So they say, you know, like when you're doing vulnerability scanning, they might say, give me a 19, you know, I guess, you know, what's your network? Say, oh, it's 192.168, you know, 2.32/27. Okay, what am I going to plug in as far as the IP address range into my scanner? You know, how do I know if I have scanning systems I'm not supposed to be scanning? So understanding, okay, you're talking 32, because a lot of times you'll use the network address now, right? You'll assign that to a host. So really, you don't get 2 to the x minus 2, you get the other one, 2.
You don't use the network.
You can use the network, but you can on a router. You can use the network, you can't use the broadcast. But whatever. I mean, essentially, I know what I'm going to plug into my system is a 192.168.2.32.263. You know,
It helps you
63
know too,
broadcast.
like for instance, in our environment, if we see you're on the 150 network,
Mhm.
we know you're wireless. Or if you
Right.
see you're on a certain network, we know you're on a certain floor.
Right.
So
Logical.
when you're looking at just addresses, you can say that address leads to that computer.
And so subnetting, knowing these bit values, you know, from this is right to left, you know, knowing how, and then what you do in order for, like where the subnet mask is, you do what's called an ANDing to determine, you know, that brings back all kinds of memories.
From a test perspective, they won't need to know how to subnet. This is just.
Yeah, you won't need to know this for the exam. This is good for practical life stuff when you're dealing with networks. You will need to know that TCP/IP is a 32-bit IP address. You'll need to know that it's 4 octets, 8 bits long each. I mean, so you will need to know what's on. Really, if you know what's on the slides, you're pretty much fine. So 2 to the 32nd gives you 4.3 billion IP addresses. Originally, when that was, you know, in the 70s, like, oh, we will never, ever run out of IP addresses. So they ran out of IP addresses. So IP version 6 came along with security built in, with IPsec built in, and now that's a 128-bit IP address. So 2 to the 128th bit is, I don't know, so it's a large number. So yeah, we're running out of them. So IP header is 20 bytes long. So 20 bytes is, you know, actually pretty large. You can fit a lot of stuff in 20 bytes. It's 160 bits with no options. Key fields, the version. So version 4 for IP version 4, that's what you would see on almost every packet. You would see it on every packet on IP version 4 network, but most people aren't using, anybody using IP version 6 on purpose? I say on purpose because I love the auto configuration, and my system just starts communicating with your system over IP version 6, and I didn't even know that it was doing that. So if you're not using IP version 6, disable IP version 6 on your network interface card. So the letter, IHL, the length of the IP header, the type of service. So this is where my QoS flag might be set. Identification flags, offset, all used for putting the data back together again. TTL, just make sure that the packet just doesn't bounce around on the network forever. The rule is, once it hits a router, transverses a router, that the TTL gets decremented by 1. So usually, there's a TTL of maybe 15 on the packet. So it's only going to bounce around for a little bit before it just dies off. Because once it reaches, gets decremented to 0, then an ICMP message would usually be generated and sent back to the source saying whatever. Protocol, embedded protocol. So what is that next level? Where's this going to be going? TCP or UDP? Source and destination IP addresses. So that alone, takes up 3264 bits of the header, and then options, just padding, not really used for anything. This is what the header looks like. It's hard to see, maybe a little bit, but you can see how things are broken down. You can see the length of each. So there's the 20 bytes, and this is not part of the header. These are the 20 bytes. There's source and destination, the protocol, TTL, all that good stuff, and kind of where it's at in the packet. If you want more definition on what those things are, you can read them. For the test, you won't need to memorize this, but for the test, it's good to know it. It's good to know that this is what an IP header looks like, and in general, this is the things that are there. But you don't have to break down an IP header. They're not going to ask you so what is the TTL length in an IP header? You're not going to get asked that. So IP fragmentation, if a packet exceeds, I've alluded to this a little bit, there's a maximum transmission unit for Ethernet networks, for all networks. The default usually is 1500 bytes. So if a packet is larger, if it's a jumbo packet, it's going to have to be fragmented. The router's not going to just forward it. But some packets, sometimes they'll have the DF flag set, so the do not fragment flag will be set. That means when I sent the packet, I was like, you can't break this thing up. The router's like, I ain't sending it, and it's breaking up. Well, then you're going to generate an ICMP message back. It's going to say naughty. So MTU is the maximum PDU size on the network. Fragmentation breaks the larger packet into smaller packets. There'll be, if you go back to the header, the fragment offset will be used to put the data back together again. So if I had to fragment the data, that's where I would put in the IP header. IP identification fields used to reassociate packets. It's funny when it's been a long, long day. Pegments and pegments and fackets, right? I said facket, not what you thought I said. So fragment offset gives the data offset, whatever, good stuff. The important thing to know here is MTU. What an MTU is, when I would fragment a packet going across the network, or when the router would fragment a packet, it would be if it exceeds the MTU for the network size. And you can manually assign that in a router. It doesn't have to be 1500. That just is kind of the general rule. IP version 6, it's the successor to IP version 4. It's to, fix the problem of us running out of data, or running out of IP address space. 128 bits as opposed to the 32-bit. Simple routing, simple address assignment. I don't need DHCP anymore. I don't need BootP anymore. It's auto assigned. At least the local address, the global address, would be assigned also auto, but differently. So lack of IP version 4 was the primary factor. You can see the number 346 trillion. It's a big number. It's 340.282.368. That's on the test. The exact number. You will need to memorize that. That'd be funny.
Be able to calculate 2 to the 128.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in your head.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's like the ultimate. You get the CISSP plus. The IP version 6 header, larger and simpler than it's larger because of the source and destination are going to have to be 128 bits each. That's the primary reason. There's not nearly as much stuff in it. The version field, the class, so again, quality of service, if this is, kind of a packet that should take precedence over others. The payload length, that's how long the data is. The header, the next header and hop limit, all that stuff is there. This is what the packet looks like. So you can see most of the header is source and destination, right? That's going to take up 128 bits each. The other stuff is really pretty simple. The biggest one is traffic class, really. you know, how important this data is. You don't need to know IP version 6 very much. Most of us aren't using IP version 6. We don't run into IP version 6 much. They keep saying someday. There's just this very big reluctance. I think a lot of IP folks are a little nervous about going to IP version 6. I would be. So other things about IP version 6 is the auto configuration. So they can statelessly auto configure their own address. And what they use is they use, you know, their MAC address. You know, essentially your system uses its MAC address to assign part of the stateless auto configuration address. So auto configuration, I don't need DHCP anymore.
So you don't need like DHCP servers?
Nope, you're not for IP version 6. You can still implement DHCP. That would be state, what do they call it? Stateful auto configuration. You can still use DHCP, but you don't need it. Stateless auto configuration will take your MAC address and use that to configure its IP version 6 address. 128 bits long, colons instead of periods, just so we can make things more complicated for everybody. Not just that, but you collapse colons if there's nothing, if there's no data in that, and it's not even an octet anymore, but in that section, it will just collapse the colons and do, you know, 2 colons, so they start to look really kind of funny for people. So one series of zeros may be condensed. Yep, there you go, into 2 colons. Stateless auto configuration removes the requirement for DHCP, and then we've got stateful auto configuration, or stateful auto configuration. For the test on this slide, understand the difference between stateless auto configuration and stateful auto configuration. And stateless means I don't need DHCP. I'm not going to use DHCP. If I choose, I still want to have that level of control in my network. That'd be stateful auto configuration. I like DHCP because I can always kind of find out, you know, where my IP addresses have been assigned. I have a little more control over my network than not having DHCP. The only reason why I wouldn't want to have DHCP, I mean, people might make a case, well, you know, the network is more chatty, but it's not, right? If I set my lease time for a long enough period, you know, it's just not chatty at all. So I don't know. I like that level of control on a network if I were running it. I don't like things auto anything on my network normally.
How does an environment change to IP6?
How do you change IP? You need to update all your systems to speak IP6.
Very painfully.
Yeah. Now your applications will have to be IP6 aware, or you can tunnel IP6 and IP4. But I would never do it on an internal network because I'm never going to run out of IP addresses on the internal network. So there's nothing to motivate me to do that internally. ISPs are doing it. Large organizations with big footprints are doing it because they do, you know, have more of a problem running out of IP addresses on their external hosts and extranet hosts more. But in general, I haven't seen anybody make the full transition. You can see what the difference is between these IP version 6 addresses. So there's 2 addresses that get sort of assigned. One is the scope link. So it's the link address, and then you've got the global address. The link address is essentially just, it's like the local area network address. Oh, bless you. And the scope global address is the routable address. So this is, yeah. You can see in these 2, the only thing that changed is that first chunk. I'm going to call it an octet. Do you even call these octets in IP version 6? Let's call them chunks. You don't need to know it for the exam. For the exam, you have global and link. The first address is the global routable address, so that FC01 in that top one is the global address. Routing advertisements are used to assign, those would come from a router or something that you set up to be sending routing assignments. The second address is link global. That's not going to be routed. Yeah, anyway. That's really all you need to know for the exam. Link.
Be able to tell the difference between those 2.
Yeah, being able to tell the difference between there's a link address and a global address and what separates the 2. A little more about auto configuration. You know, this is the process that gets followed. So you take the MAC address, embed the FFEE constant with the middle 2 bytes. This is why you don't have to memorize it, right? It's not simple like IP version 4 is to me. But embed the FFE constant in the middle 2 bytes, set the universal bit, prepend the network prefix and convert the colon format to that other thing. Convert one string of repeating zeros to 2 colons to come up with that, right? It's just, you know, and if you're an IP version 6 guru, you're like, yeah, duh, piece of cake. Well, maybe. So IP version 6 challenges, security challenges. This is why, you know, if you're not using it, don't use it. If you're don't know how to use it, don't use it. So an IP version 6 enabled system will automatically configure its link local address, and it may start communicating with other systems that have done the same. Without the need for any other IP version 6 enabled infrastructure. So I don't have to have IP version 6 routers. I don't have to have IP version 6 switches. My system will just assign itself an IP address if IP version 6 is enabled. If yours does the same thing, now we can communicate. It's now a covert channel also, right? If I'm doing, you know, maybe alerting and monitoring on IP version 4 traffic in my, you know, IDS, IPS, I may not see IP version 6. I may not speak IP version 6. To me, it may look like noise, you know, meaning the IDS, IPS system. So it could be a covert channel. So communicate with each other over the same LAN, whether I know it or not. That's probably the biggest one. IDS, yeah, there's the case where my IDS maybe isn't IP version 6. You can't read that, know what, you know, make sense of that data stream. So it'll be a blind spot. Yes, many network professionals have a limited experience using IP version 6. Does anybody here use IP version 6 and know it well? Yeah, it's, what's that? Yeah, U of M. Yep, that'd be a good research network that's probably using it. What's that?
Scan the network that
You scan the network?
using it externally, but they're using IPv4 as the main.
Okay.
There's also another code in IPv6 currently speaking as a group.
Yeah.
Third parties can write headers, their own custom headers, up to like 4.3 gig in size.
Wow.
So
Is that a flaw in IP version 6 or the implementation of it?
in IPv6.
So I can write a 4.3 gigabyte header in an IP version 6 packet. Oh my gosh.
He's one of these long-haired.
Yeah, he would probably know. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So what could I hide in a 4.3 gigabyte file? We should try that.
DLP problem?
Yeah, right. Data exfiltration.
So don't.
And the network is so slow and I can't figure it out. Yeah, because wow. We should do that. We should get you and the guys to monkey with that. What's that?
I think it's CIA.
Oh yeah, they're totally on it. So, you know, the third bullet point, limited experience, yes. And number 4, you know, if you're not using IP version 6, disable it. And disable it on all your network devices and systems. It's a hole. It doesn't need to be there. Simple to fix. All right, classful networks. So we did a little bit of classful. This is really the /24. So this is, if I was going with this 192.168.2.4 with the /24 or 255.255.255.0, that's a classful network address potentially. So original IP version 4 networks before 1993 were all classful. So we had class A, B, C were the ones that were in operation. Class D was multicast. So we still use class D addresses, but they're multicast. We don't assign them to systems, and class E is reserved for what? I don't know, just reserved for something. It was always reserved. So the leading bits, it's always easy to tell what on a class full network. Now most networks are classless, right? Like my network, right? Pretty classless. Yeah. Brad's network, classful. It's a classy network. Mine, classless. I got no class in
I
mine.
appreciate the
Right?
assumption there.
Well, still call it like I see it, man. Classy, classless. That's how I think of this. So you can always tell the leading bits. So the leading bits on a 192 is 1, 1, right? And then the rest are all zeros. 110 is a class C, right? The leading bits will tell me immediately, which is nice because if, you know, I guess if I were a router and I was caring about this, I would only have to read the first few bits before making a determination on what class. So size of the network, the number bit field, so 8, 16, or 24. So that's where we've segmented the network. So whether it's 8 bits, a class A network is just the first octet, right? The rest of, so the other 24 bits are reserved for hosts. So 2 to the 24 for hosts, potentially. Class Bs are 16, 16, so 2 to the 16th, that's the number of hosts, 17,384, something like that. There's a 32,000, I can't remember. Oh, is it there? Oh yeah, 16,384 at this at 17. Yeah, there you go. So the number of networks and the number of hosts. Yeah, I know. 2 to the 2. Yeah, it would have been easier just to look at a thing. So class A, the first 8 bits are reserved for the network address. The last 24 are hosts. Class Bs are 16, 16, and then class Cs are 24 and 8. Right? So 192.168 is your classic 192.0.0. 0, that's all class C address range. The 10 bit, so that'd be 128 and then 0, right? The highest I can go then, I don't know, whatever it is. But class Bs start at 172, 128. Start address, is that class B? No, see, I keep thinking the RFC 1918 with the 172.16. I'm getting myself mixed up. But anyway, this is a good diagram to remember, starting in any. So class A, B, and C, and sort of the breakdowns between them. It's good to remember. Makes sense? Okay, so I'm confusing myself. So CIDR is for classless interdomain routing. So this is what I get into. You were the classful guy. I'm the classless interdomain routing kind of guy. So we needed a way to break down networks to make them a little less rigid, right? Rather than me having to be stuck with, say I had a class B and me having to be stuck with 16,384 addresses, I could subnet it, I could break it down into smaller chunks. Classless interdomain routing allows me to do that. Not anymore, I'm not tied to classful networks anymore. So network sizes beyond the arbitrary stateful network sizes. A class A network 10.0.0 contains IP addresses that begin with 10. Whatever, 10.3.9, whatever. Essentially, I can do things like this. I can subnet networks. I can take bigger networks, subnet them down, make them smaller on different boundaries. That's classless interdomain routing. Now, CIDR notation, that's the slash whatever. So the way we used to do it before we had classless interdomain routing and CIDR notation is we would say 192.168.2.0, 255, 255, 255, 255, 0. You know, now slash 24. So that's the CIDR notation. Make sense? And we just did all of this here. We took the larger network and broke it down into smaller ones. And if you remember this too, if you wanted to actually do it, you don't have to do it for the exam. You need to know why I would potentially do it. But the actual doing it, just remember 2 to the x minus 2 and you'll nail it. Right? RFC 1918, this was the private IP addressing RFC. So again, this was all in efforts of kind of using IP addressing more efficiently so we stop running out of IP addresses. And it was efficient enough because now that we've got, you know, network address translation and I've got non-routable IP addresses for the internal with RFC 1918, now I'm not running out of IP addresses anymore. There's not this huge push. There was a panic before this stuff. And so there's a big rush to get IP version 6 out. And that's one of the reasons why, too, we're just no rush to do this. So RFC 1918 are the private IP addresses. They're not routable on the internet. So if you ever see a network, if you ever see anything with a 192.168 on your outside firewall interface, that's weird, right? Not that it couldn't happen, but it's weird. It's like, what the hell is plugged in my local network, like right here? Right? Because it would have to be something between, like right here. Right? But, you know, something to call your attention to. I also shouldn't expect a 172.16, you know, address to be sent anywhere. Right? Plug it into the internet and send her letter bucket's not going to happen. So these are reserved. These 3 blocks of IP addresses of 10.0.0.0 to 10.255 all the way across are 10.0.0.0/8. Insider notation, that's all reserved. So I can assign that to any IP address. I don't have to go to IANA and get myself a chunk of IP addresses. The 172.1.6 to 172.32/12, and then the 192.168/16 are my private IP address spaces. Essentially, you see anything with a 192.168, that's internal. So public internet connecting using untranslated RFC19 addresses, destination will fail. Yep. Untranslated. We've got translated network address translation, which would take an internal IP address and translate it to a publicly routable IP address. Network address translation does that, and that's a different RFC. RFC19, if you want to read RFCs, there it is. You don't necessarily have to remember RFCs. Yeah.
I'm just curious, right, approximately what year it was merged? Late 80s or 90s?
It was in the 90s. Seems like it was in the 90s. You want to look it up? Yeah, it'd be. Let's see.
96.
Yeah, it sounds. I mean, it was in the 90s.
Yeah, February 1996.
I don't remember where I was. I was cleaning boot sector viruses then. So network address translation, a whole nother, RFC. It's to translate the IP addresses, that I've assigned internally to publicly routable IP addresses. There's 3 kinds that you'll need to know for the exam. The first is static NAT. That's a 1-to-1 translation. So if I have 47 hosts on the internal network that need to communicate on the internet with static NAT, I would need 47 external IP addresses. I'd have to go to IANA and get myself, or go to my ISP, who's got a pool that they can send me or sell me. I can rent from them. I would need that 1-to-1 translation. Pool NAT is a number of public IP addresses, and it would kind of serve those up in a round robin format typically. So I would use that pooled IP address, that publicly routable IP address, for the time of my communication, and then it would go back into the pool for the next person to use. It's not a 1-to-1, it's a 1-to-many, or many-to-1, many-to-many, whatever. The more common and what we see now, is port address translation, also called NAT overloading, which would be one IP, one essential external IP address, and all of my internal communications are routed through that one external IP address. And the way it does that is through source port and destination port. It's a socket mapping that's maintained. So, say my my computer will assign itself what's called an ephemeral port. And I want to communicate on the network. It's some port over 1028 as a source port. That would then be used to translate with the port address translation. A table would be maintained in the firewall to translate that to maybe that same source port out with, let's say it's going to port 80, right? But that source port then, when it comes back, when the communication comes back, the table says it goes back to Evan and not back to Matt, right? You see what I'm saying? It's all, yeah, it's port address translation. It's all based on the ports. So conceivably, I could use, if everybody was communicating at the exact same time, reports are there again. 65,000. So I'm limited to 65,000 port address translations. Theoretically, there's others that would be used that would be off limits and restricted, but conceivably I could use one externally routable, or publicly routable IP address for 65,000 different connections. Yeah, so that's the different types of NAT. Any questions on those types of NAT? At the 1-to-1, we got the pool, and then we've got the port address translation, which is really the most common. It's what everybody's kind of using now. Oh, yeah, a pretty picture of things. Address resolution protocol and reverse address resolution protocol. So I've mentioned this before. Address resolution protocol, its purpose is to take a logical IP address and map it to, or resolve it to a MAC address, a hardware address. That's what we'll be communicating with that layer 2. It's a broadcast, an ARP broadcast. So you can see 192.1, or in this case 10.23.51.96, we'll say. ARP is essentially asking, hey, I need to know who has this MAC address for this particular IP address. The system that has that IP address will reply back with its MAC address, and then the communication will take place at that layer 2 now as it goes, through the protocol stack. Does that make sense? That's an ARP broadcast or an ARP request. Now you can insert yourself. There's no authentication in here or anything else like this. This is a broadcast, so anybody can see that this ARP resolution is happening. An attacker can easily take an ARP reply with, instead of, I can knock this guy offline, right, and reply with my own MAC address. Say, hey, I got that IP address, and then, okay, now we're going to start communicating. Right?
So local network thing?
Local network thing. Yep. That'd be the attack. That's how you can sniff. You essentially do an ARP poisoning attack on, like the router at Caribou. Now all the data that goes to the Caribou router also goes to me. Right? I see it all. And so it's kind of a cool attack when, I don't know, back when it was not ethical. You just don't do it anymore. It's just not fun. There's nothing fun to it, but it is kind of interesting, and it's an easy way. That's why we don't want people. We want people using encryption. When they're using, Caribou's network. We want you using HTTPS and SSL or TLS, and we want you using VPN because you can sniff that traffic very easily just by doing an ARP poisoning attack. And MAC filtering as well, right? It's also another reason why, we want you, disabling your switch ports in meeting rooms. Somebody's not just sitting in and sniffing all your traffic, among other things. I mean, if you've got physical access. So reverse ARP is working the other way around. So, hey, I've got this MAC address. Give me an IP address so I can communicate on the network. That's reverse ARP. You'd see this in diskless workstations. A RARP server, reverse address resolution protocol server, would respond to that. Pretty simple. So limited and directed broadcast addresses. A broadcast is essentially a communication. Hey, it's like your radio. Everybody listen up. I've got this communication. 2 types of IP version broadcasts. We've got the limited broadcast, which is the limited broadcast is all bits on. So it's addressed to 255, 255, 255, 255. It's not forwarded across the router. That's what makes it limited. So even though it's kind of addressed to a broader audience, it's limited because it won't be forwarded across the router. A directed broadcast would be, let's say I wanted to send a broadcast on, in this case, the 192.0.2/24 network. I would then address it to 192.0.2/255. Right? So it'd be a broadcast on that network. Left over for the network, all those bits are on. Does that make sense? That would be a directed broadcast. Sometimes routers don't forward that either. But the 2 different types of broadcasts: limited, all the bits are on. It's to everything. The limited broadcast would be just to the network that I'm targeting. Layer 2 broadcast, so it reaches all nodes in what's called the broadcast domain. I talked about that a little bit. Within the broadcast domain, layer 2 actually breaks up the collision domain, but semantics. Ethernet broadcast address, all Fs. So the entire MAC address is all set to all those bits. Now that's just hexadecimal. That's the same as if we were to translate that into binary, it'd be all ones. So traffic on Ethernet switch is received on all connected nodes. That's essentially, it's a layer 2 broadcast. ARP would be a layer 2 broadcast. Promiscuous mode sounds dirty, especially so late like this. But promiscuous mode is essentially my computer will only listen to and process up the protocol stack data that's assigned to it. When I put a network adapter or a network interface into promiscuous mode, I'm going to process all network traffic, whether it's assigned to me or not. right? That's the difference between promiscuous mode and just kind of normal mode. So it accesses all unicast traffic on a network segment. Systems such as NIDS devices. So NIDS is Network Intrusion Detection System, runs in promiscuous mode. It's looking at all the network traffic, not just the stuff that's assigned specifically to it, right? That's promiscuous mode. Make sense? Network nodes normally only see the unicast traffic that's sent directly to them, except for in promiscuous mode. Accessing unicast traffic sent to other nodes requires two things: a network interface card configured in promiscuous mode, the ability to access other unicast traffic on a network segment. Devices such as switches provide traffic isolation, so I'll need something to bypass that, a hub, or put a switch into maybe a span port or replicate ports. So a span port or tap, those are all ways that I could still see that. So that's one of the challenges. If I put a network interface, network intrusion detection system, and I just plug it into the wall, I expect it to get traffic, it's not going to get the traffic that I'm expecting. It's only going to get the traffic that the switch is going to forward to it, even if it's running in promiscuous mode, right? If I want to see all that traffic, I have to either replicate all the data for the ports that I want to monitor to also come to my switch port, or I'm going to have to do a tap, which means I'm going to tap into the network traffic, all of it on the switch. You would see this maybe, there's a lot of different ways, or I'd use a hub, right? Because there's no filtering that happens with hubs. Makes sense? So TCP, reliable protocol, layer 4, three-way handshake. SYN, SYNAC, ACK-BACK. That's the three-way handshake. It's a SYN packet. It's got the SYN flag set. There'll be a SYN acknowledgement. SYN is a request to synchronize. There'll be a SYN synchronize acknowledgement back, and then there'll be an acknowledgement. That'll be the three-way handshake. So that's the three-way handshake. Reliable connections, reorder segments that arrive out of order. You know, all those things happen with TCP. TCP header, 20 bytes long with no options. Important fields, source and destination port. So as we move up the protocol stack, we were at the network layer, we had source and destination IP address. The port is, what daemon is this going to go to? Essentially, what service is going to be listening? Do I need to hand this off to? So source and destination ports are important. Sequence acknowledgement numbers will put the data back together again. The TCP flags, what kind of packet is this? There's a number of flags. I just mentioned two: the synchronize or synchronize flag, the acknowledgement flag. There's an urgent flag. There's a number of others. We'll get to those. The Christmas tree attack is setting all flags on. And that used to crash NT systems, but it doesn't do anything anymore. Window size is, how much buffer essentially do I have on the receiving side before I'm going to expect something else. So this is what it looks like. So there's your flags. If you want to know what the flags are, they're all here. So fin, we're finished talking, synchronize, reset, push, acknowledgement, urgent, echo, and reduce. The biggest ones are SYN, ACK, push, reset, urgent. But you don't need to know those. You might need to know SYN, SYNAC, and ACK-BACK. Yeah. Synchronize, I want to talk to you. Synchronize, acknowledgement, I understand you want to talk to me. Okay, that's the ACK-BACK, and now we're synchronized and talking. It's that three-way handshake. It's sort of an introduction of how we're going to discuss things. There's other things in that packet, but those are the flags that are set in those packets. You don't need to know what else is in that. But source and destination ports are really important. Sequence number, acknowledgement number. This is a connection-oriented protocol, so there's going to have to be some acknowledgement that I got what I said I got. That'll be in the acknowledgement number. Checksum, sometimes it's used, sometimes it's not. Urgent pointer. The window size is kind of buffer. How much are we going to agree to communicate at any one time, sort of thing. Simple, yeah. It's a lot of stuff, but it's all pretty basic stuff, and you don't have to be an expert in any of this stuff. Like, if we didn't have to do this, it was just kind of fun. Plus, I didn't even think if I could still do it. I haven't done it so damn long. So TCP ports, from source port to destination port, such as source. So there's a source port, 51178. That's an ephemeral port. It's above the kind of the reserved ports. To destination port 22. we will communicate over these 2 ports, right? It'll be a response back from port 22 of the destination, which is now the respondent, back to, it'll now be attached or sent to destination port 51178, right? So we'll communicate over those 2 ports. The port field 16 bits, so we have possible 65,535 different port numbers. 2 types of ports. We've got the reserve ports, that's 11023 and lower, and then the ephemeral ports. If you want to know what all the ports are that have been assigned, there's the port numbers from IANA. That's the Internet Association of Internet Assigned Numbering Association. Yeah, you have well-known ports, whatever. We know a lot of the ports. We've already labeled off. You don't need to memorize all the ports. It's just good to know how these things communicate. So a socket pair, that would be source, destination, IP address, and ports, right? That table, if I do a net stat, I can see my sockets that are open. That's what this is an output of, is net stat. Source IP address, source port, destination IP, destination port, that's called a socket. Those 4 things together is called a socket. So a combination IP address and TCP UDP port on 1 node. Socket can listen, waiting for a connection. You can see that the state that these sockets are in at the time. Socket pair is all that stuff. Basic. TCP flags. So these are the flags that I mentioned before. They're there in the packet. Urgent data acknowledgement. We would see that in the 3-way handshake. The push flag, push data to the application layer. So we're going to bypass. It's essentially it's not going through any kind of a presentation decompression piece. If the application is essentially handing off right from TCP. Reset, synchronize, finish, we're done talking. Yeah, 2 new flags added in 2001. Not necessary for the test, but that's what they are. This is the handshake. So 3-way handshake, reliable connection. We're going to agree on the way we're going to communicate in the 3-way handshake. It's full duplex. Both sides synchronized. We have the SYN pack first. We have the SYN ACK, the synchronized acknowledgement, and then the ACK back. It's easy to remember: SYN, ACK, ACK back. It kind of rolls off your tongue. The client chooses a different, whatever. You can see the full 3-way handshake. What's important to know in the 3-way handshake is that if you hear 3-way handshake, it's TCP, and then it's a SYN synchronized packet, a SYN ACK, and an ACK back. That's essentially enough to know for the exam.
There's one packet going 1 way for the SYN, and then
Yes.
1 packet coming back.
Yes. Yep. 1 packet, 1 packet back, 1 packet back. That's how it works. Synchronize acknowledgement, sync. Right now, get file. So this looks like a web. No, maybe not. I don't know where it is. But that's the 3-way handshake. Before we're going to actually do data transfer, we're going to synchronize. We're going to do this 3-way handshake first. That's it. Holy crap! I was only a couple minutes late, and I only stumbled like 48 times. I'm feeling good. Any questions for tonight? A lot of stuff for network people. That's like I said before. For people that have a network background, this is like pretty basic stuff. But for people who don't, you can see how they can struggle, right? Because there's a lot of stuff to memorize. And if you haven't worked on networks before, it can get hard. So just memorize it. Spend time and do it. So if you're not technical, this was probably a bunch of gibberish. It's like, what the hell is all this? That's okay. But for us, it was kind of basic. We will start off where we left off on Thursday. I'll try to get a good night's sleep, and we'll have a good time. Thanks, guys.